Pitchers and Catchers Day, so we figured we'll talk some more baseball. Kevin Cooney covers baseball, the Phillies, PhillyVoice, Forbes, and he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as pitchers and catchers are here. But the baseball world, they're the least progressive of the sports, Kevin, but they're really trying to jump out with this one here.
You know, when somebody gets this far out of character, you usually take them for some professional help. And I think that's what baseball needs at this point. They have gone, under Rob Manfred, they have just completely lost all concept of what actually has made the sport great for about 140 years. So,
well, there's a lot of people who would suggest that the sport needs some help. The game itself, the speed up and yada yada. I see, even if you love this idea of this playoff thing, this isn't helping the on-field product. This is a one-night made-for-TV event to kind of manufacture interest in your sport, but your game has to be able to produce when it's being highlighted.
And you know, here's the thing, Mike. Say what you want about the sport. And look, is it too slow? Yes. Is there areas where they have to improve? Absolutely. There's some people that are never going to come back to baseball because they're not interested in that pace of game. You know, it's a different society. I get all that, okay? What baseball should really be doing is selling the things that make the sport wonderful, which is at times the pace of game. And on a summer night, it's awesome. And to me, the best part about baseball is October and the playoffs. And the idea that you have to do something to get to October, to play in October, and that when you get to October, anything can happen. That is the best part of the sport. And this idea that you're going to make it a joke with teams picking opponents in some XFL-like fashion with, you know, an 82-win team still being in the mix. You know, baseball for years laughed at the NFL or at the NBA and the NHL for doing stuff like this, as far as, like, you know, having 500 teams in the playoffs. And now they're going to embrace it. It makes no sense.
Kevin, you know, I'm one of the younger, I guess I'm a younger demographic here compared to Mike. Not that I'm that much younger, but I'm 29 going on 30. And I like where their head's at. I'm not saying I'm in love with this idea, but listen, you look at baseball's strengths, like you just said. I think postseason play is their strength. I'm the first to admit I love baseball when postseason play starts. It's just dramatic, everything that we know and love about baseball. I like the idea that they're possibly looking to expand the playoff pool from 10 to 14. I think that helps highlight the sport. You have more teams in that postseason play. Now, the TV thing where you pick your opponent, I don't know. It's a little tacky and gimmicky. I'm not in love with it, but here we are today debating it and talking about it. And that's a start. That's not the be-all, end-all, but I'm more on the side of, okay, baseball, I like that you're trying.
Well, let me put it this way, Ryan. Okay, let me give an example like this. Do you like M&Ms?
Sure, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Would you have M&Ms for dinner?
Depends how my financial month was, but probably not.
Okay, the point is that probably not a good idea to have M&Ms for dinner, and I think this is what basically this is turning into. The reason that the baseball postseason was so good was the teams that made it deserved it over the long grind and everything. And I know what you're saying, that, all right, maybe last year, you know, think about it, okay? Last year, the last team in the American League playoffs would have, if under this format, would have been the Boston Red Sox.
Yeah.
Okay? They had 83 wins. Do you really think that an 83-win team belonged in? And what's sad is they were that was the last above 500 team in the American League. Okay? I just don't think this is what the sport needs. You know what the sport needs? The sport needs to market its stars better. The sport needs to find a way of making its product on television more appealing. To make it where ESPN doesn't treat it like a joke with Jess Mendoza and A-Rod blatantly having conflict of interest, and I know Mendoza's now been pulled out of the Sunday Night booth, that the sport, that you don't feel like you need a slide ruler when you're watching the sport anymore because of all the graphics that they're putting up. And that's what the sport needs. The sport needs to kind of come back to Joe fan and make them interested again.
You're 100% right, and I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate to make this a little bit interesting here, but I do think you look at the other three major sports, and baseball, it's played every single day for what feels like, and they only have 10 teams making the playoffs out of 30. And, you know, if the Red Sox sneak in with 83 wins, that's a big market. I mean, that's just one example from this previous season. But, you know, I'm fine with that. I think if you have to look at quicker fixes, which is not the be-all, end-all, I'm with you. They need to market their stars.
Well, the interesting thing is, too, Kevin and Rye, is the National League team that would have got in would have been the Mets. Right. So baseball would have backed itself into having Boston and New York market into their playoffs, which probably would have been a help, don't you think?
But that's all. You know what this honestly only guarantees is that you would have the Red Sox, Dodgers, Cubs in some.
Yes.
Red
because
Sox,
I think the second.
The two New York teams. Yeah, you would end up with the major markets almost guaranteeing they'll get in the playoffs. And then really, if you're a ticket holder for the Yankees or the Cubs or whatever, what incentive is there to go into a May night game against the Rockies? Really? If you know that you're going to get in, is there really that big of an incentive, you know?
Well, I don't know if you're going to know you're going to get in at May anyway. And I think that's part of the problem. I mean, I've had bold predictions out there or bold takes where I say start the season later. I mean, the fact that we have April and May baseball.
The season back, guys. I think the season should go back to about 140 at this point. I think the way they have to look at things, and they won't do it because it'll mean a decline in revenue. Okay, cut back the season. Let's say to 154. Okay. And make that wild card game instead of a playing game, make it best 2 out of 3, and do it where maybe the team that's the number one wild card hosts all 3 games. You know, maybe that's the way to do it. That way, you're not really watering the product down, and you're getting probably the best result going forward for the postseason.
Kevin Cooney's with us, of course, a longtime baseball writer. And you can check out him on Twitter at Kevin Cooney. He covers the Phillies, PhillyVoice, Forbes. Also, check out his podcast called Working the Beat, where this week you guys did a little baseball. So we'll talk to you on Pitchers and Catches Day. Phillies got a whole heck of a lot of guys down there. They brought in cast-offs and veteran utility players, but ultimately, are the expectations around this team any different than they were or should be a year ago, where halfway through the season you saw the writing on the wall? Did they get any better to make us feel like, you know what, you should be invested from start to finish?
Well, you have 71 people in your camp. The only thing it's done is drive up the hotel market in Clearwater at this point, because I don't know if you could sort through 71 guys, to be honest, in camp. And then when you figure that really they have, at least in the everyday roster, maybe 2 spots open, maybe 2 utility player spots. You look at their bullpen, maybe there's 2 or 3 other spots. Starting rotation's a whole different example. Look, Mike, I think Gregorius helps. I'm not as big a Zach Wheeler fan as some others. I think I have concerns about paying that type of money to a guy who missed 2 seasons, basically, with Tommy John, and who is inconsistent, to say the least, as well, which Zach Wheeler was. I mean, it wasn't like you were getting Syndergaard or DeGrom. You were getting the Mets number 4. So everybody's going to pump the brakes here a little bit on this. But what they do have is they have a more representative major league manager in Joe Girardi, a guy who has a ring and a guy who really I thought Girardi's best job was his last year with the Yankees. I thought in 2017, I thought that team that probably now we're learning should have probably went to the World Series was his best job out of the bunch. And, Girardi is good. Brian Price as your pitching coach, I think will be a huge upgrade from what they had with Chris Young. You're counting on the fact that they find 2 starters out of that bunch of 4 or 5, and that Rhys Hoskins becomes a buffer between Harper and Real Muto that's worthy of it. If that happens, they're gonna hang in the race. If they don't, they're probably a 77 to 80 win team.
Hey, Kevin, now that the dust has settled and information has come out, do you feel any differently? And I don't remember your original, stance on the Astros, but now that it's more and more and more has come out, guys have lost their jobs, and now here we are. Do you feel like more drastic, or just let it go, or do you have a stance on that?
Well, I mean, something had to be done, and Jeff Luhnow and AJ Hinch paid the price. Obviously, Alex Cora, paid the price up in Boston, and there's still that portion of the report to come out. Beltran, obviously, because he was kind of identified as the lead player involved in it, couldn't stay with the Mets. Baseball created this problem with the way they put instant replay into effect in such a shoddy manner, where you have basically the guy in the back room who could, it was like an open book test every time that somebody went for a replay, and by doing that and by having that guy there, you were inviting temptation, and baseball did nothing to stop it. I think that should the Astros have their World Series stripped away? No, because to be honest, that's like the silliest rule in the history of the world. That the NCAA does it is stupid. But should these guys face career punishments? Yeah. Jeff Luhnow, and by the way, part of this, guys, is the fact that the Astros, heading into this long before this came out, because they act like they've invented the sport, they were hated anyway. So a lot of these guys are not going to get other jobs in the field even after suspensions, because, to be frank, people hated them to begin with, and so the rest of the sport took great delight in a way in seeing what happened to Luhnow and the Astros.
Kevin, I know you've covered sports of all angles in this town for a long time. You know the personalities very well. Is Joel Embiid much ado about nothing, or do you think there's something there that the ownership group should be somewhat concerned with?
Mike, I said this on the podcast last night with Kern. I blame the ownership group, and I blame the ownership group in this sense. And I know you probably will disagree with me on this. I think they've enabled they've enabled a large portion of what has gone wrong here. They always stick up for the player. I think that image from the Super Bowl a couple weeks ago shows me not an ownership group willing to be good to their players. It's ownership group that wants to be buddies with their players. And you can't be that in professional sports. You really can't. And the other part, Mike, and I'm interested to hear your point of view, this team has a major optics problem. I think they have an optics problem of everything they do seems to backfire on them ever since Josh Harris took over. The way that from being ridiculous with Adam Aaron to being indecisive on the Hinkie thing when pressed a little bit by the league, to the whole handling last year or the last couple of years of the Colangelo nonsense, and now down to this. And the general belief I think they have that, kind of like the Astros, that they've reinvented the wheel. And I think that's a major problem for them. And it's one that I'm not sure is going to get straight. Our problem.
Yeah.
as far as the personnel in the PR. It's almost an arrogance of the ownership of the organization.
Yeah, I guess the one question or answer that I don't know that we'll ever get is, did the NBA step in? Did the Sixers kind of embrace it? What happened with the Colangelos being placed in this organization? And I think without the answer to that question, we don't really know the true mindset of where this organization would be at this stage if that never happened.
And especially for an owner that embraced that. Remember, I guess it was the first year of Hinkie where and correct me if I'm wrong, they won like 17, 18 games. And on that day after press conference, Josh Harris was asked, what do you thought? Oh, it went great. Basically like going along with everything that took place.
Yeah.
And then, 2 years later, he's firing Hinkie for doing basically what the organization made it clear they were going to do.
Right.
I just, look, Joel Embiid has it's bad. It's a bad optic to make the fans after you've looked like hell for 4 games the way they did on this road trip. You don't ever win a fight with the fans, and you don't tell them shush and shut the what up. But there's a
was that wrong?
Problem.
Should I have not have done that?
Yeah, but you don't. I think there's a bigger issue here, and I think that's something that they better get corrected sooner rather than later.
No question. I mean, look, and tonight's game is interesting because you got 9 days off following it, and you can go in with the narrative of, see, we beat the Clippers, and it's back to, well, look, they can turn it on against whoever they feel like it. But if you lose the game, you've now lost a home game where you've been so dominant, and now you have 9 days to let that loss kind of compile of, well, the roster's bad, and the coach does this, and the front office enables that. So that's why I find tonight's game to be a very interesting matchup against a very good team, but it's in your building where you've been so good, where you can say, see, we won at home. Everything's not as bad as it seemed. But a loss going into a 9-day break really intensifies things.
And also a loss going into a 9-day break where, like, on your second game back, you're going back to Milwaukee as well. So there's an added factor in this as well after what happened in Milwaukee a couple weeks ago. Last week. Look, they're at a point. They're constructed so poorly. Okay, they're trying to play 1988 basketball in 2020, and deep down, if you, and I hate that this is not an "I told you so" moment. I think everybody had that moment of looking sideways when they brought Horford in, and they basically said, "You know what? We're fine with that 3-point shot." Well, I think you're seeing a little bit of that problem now because they relied too much on the fact that Ben was going to somehow develop some kind of a jumper. And for as great as he's been in the last month, and you can't deny they've looked pretty good when he's been the main guy on the floor. They need it. They're playing a style that doesn't work in this game today.
Kevin Cooney, great stuff. Before we let you roll here, 2 things. One, I know you guys talked college hoops on the Working the Beat pod. I believe that the NCAA tournament, now, is this a good thing or a bad thing, will be as wide open as it's ever been in the history of this tournament. Good or bad?
I think it's good. Last year I thought was pretty wide open because I didn't think anybody believed Virginia would come out of it. Yeah, I think it's pretty good. I watched Baylor last night. First time I really sat down and watched them. And boy, they played ugly against Texas. They found a way to win, but they strike me as a team that in the round of 32, if you get a good 8 seed, could get beat. Yeah, it's a wide open field, and there's a lot of quality teams. Mike, this is the year some team like Dayton gets through the Final Four, maybe even the title game.
Yep, I've been on that page. I watch a lot of college hoops, too. It's starting in, December, and every night I turn on, I'm like, this team they're not good, but they can make it because that team's no good. I mean, Michigan State, how many times did you see the preseason number 1? Ohio State was number 2 at one point. They're out. It is going to be a wild run here.
And I'll be honest, and Mike, the best player I've seen this year, and I think a guy who translates well to the next level, is Obi Toppin. Obi Toppin from Dayton is phenomenal.
Yes.
And he's a freak, and he is a high lottery pick in my mind.
I think the kid Powell from Seton Hall, too, is maybe the best player in the country.
Did you go to Dayton?
Yeah. Did I? No. I've just seen him way too much. I saw him a couple times in person when they were here to play LaSalle and St. Joe's. So.
I was going to say, is this the worst St. Joe team you've ever seen?
Yeah, not close. I mean, there's too much chaos to begin with.
Horrible.
So they're bad. Look, there's going to be one team out of Philly that's going to make the tournament, and maybe Penn can sneak in through the Ivy, but. Boy, Villanova, and it's a barren rest of the field.
The interesting message there, Kevin, is fire the coach. You got to fire the coach. Temple got rid of the coach. They stink. St. Joe got rid of the coach. They stink. Sometimes just changing the coach doesn't fix all your problems.
Well, and especially in leagues where you're going to struggle to recruit, and that's what's happened. The American is not an easy place to recruit, and I think Temple's going to find that out.
All right, Kevin Cooney, at Kevin Cooney, and check out his Working the Beat podcast. You can get that through his Twitter. It's always entertaining with him and Mike Kern, and he appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thanks, pal.
Thanks, Mike.